My parents tried forcing me to be my sister's free live-in nanny after she got pregnant. So I moved out and left them to handle her chaos. I'm just a regular 25-year-old who worked hard to graduate college and land my first job as an elementary school teacher. It's not a high-paying gig, but I love working with kids, so it's worth it. Still, money's tight, especially when you're starting out. That's why I've been living with my parents in the same suburban house I grew up in. It's not the most exciting setup, but it's practical. They charge me rent a reasonable amount, as my dad likes to science. I buy my own groceries. Plus, I chip in with chores like mowing the lawn, fixing things around the house, and even cleaning out the garage last summer when Dad hurt his back. It's not glamorous, but it's temporary. My plan was to stay for a couple of years, save some money, and then find a place of my own. Simple, right? Well, it was simple until my older sister Amanda re-entered the picture. Amanda is 32, and how do I put this nicely? She's never exactly been the responsible type. Growing up, she was the golden child. I don't know if it was because she was the firstborn, or if our parents just had a soft spot for her, but she could do no wrong in their eyes. She dropped out of college not once, but twice. The first time, it was because she didn't feel inspired. The second time, she said the professors were too demanding. She's never held down a job for more than a few months. Every time something didn't go her way, she'd quit and come up with some excuse about how it wasn't her fault. Our parents always bailed her out late on rent. They'd pay it. Car broke down. They'd cover the repair. Got a speeding ticket, and Mom would write the check while muttering about how the police target young women. Meanwhile, I was scrubbing toilets at a diner to save up for college and taking out loans to cover tuition. Amanda had been living on her own for the past couple of years, or so I thought. Turns out, she'd been bouncing between different apartments, constantly behind on rent and leaning on our parents to keep her afloat. I didn't know any of this until she showed up one day and casually mentioned she was pregnant. Now, I'm not here to judge anyone for their life choices, but let's just say Amanda wasn't exactly in a stable situation. The father of the baby was some guy she'd been seeing for a couple of months, and from what I could gather, he wasn't thrilled about the whole surprise baby thing. A key pretty much vanished as soon as she told him. You'd think this would be Amanda's wake-up call, right? Like maybe this was the moment she'd realize she needed to get her life together. But no. Instead, she ran straight to Mom and Dad, who immediately went into fix-it mode. Within a week, they started renovating the basement to turn it into a little apartment for her. They even put in a kitchenette. I didn't ask where the money was coming from, but I overheard Mom mention dipping into their retirement savings. I tried to stay out of it because, honestly, it wasn't my business. If they wanted to throw money at Amanda, that was their choice. But the thing is, I could already see the writing on the wall. My parents have this way of dragging everyone else into Amanda's problems. It's like they think we all have to band together to help her out, no matter how much of a mess she's made at first. I told myself it wouldn't affect me. The basement was being turned into Amanda's little apartment, so she'd have her own space. I figured she'd move in, do her thing, and I'd go on with my life. Sure, it was a little frustrating to watch them bend over backward for her again, but I tried not to dwell on it. That mindset worked for about 2 months. Then little things started piling up. First, Mom began making comments about how I should spend more time with Amanda since she was going through so much. Never mind that I was working full-time and coming home exhausted most days. Then came the subtle guilt trips. Mom would say things like, "You know, Amanda doesn't have anyone else to lean on right now. It's so hard being pregnant and single." She'd say this while looking directly at me like I was supposed to magically solve all of Amanda's problems. Dad wasn't any better. He'd find ways to work Amanda into every conversation. "You should be grateful for everything you have, Abby," he'd say while passing the salted dinner. "Not everyone's as lucky as you." Lucky. I was barely scraping by trying to build a career. I was trying to save money while Amanda was getting a fully renovated apartment handed to her, along with endless emotional and financial support. But things escalated when I overheard a conversation between Mom and Dad one night. They were in the living room, and I was in the kitchen making tea. She's going to need a lot of help once the baby comes, Mom said. Of course, Dad replied. We'll all pitch in. All Mom asked was, well, you, me, and Abby. Dad said it like it was obvious. I nearly dropped my mug. They hadn't said anything to me about this plan, but it was clear they'd already decided I was going to be part of it. That's when I started to feel uneasy. I didn't know the specifics yet, but I could tell they were cooking up something that was going to pull me into Amanda's chaos, whether I liked it or not. The feeling only grew when Amanda started coming over more often. She'd flop onto the couch, complaining about how hard it was to be pregnant and how unfair it was that her ex had bailed. She'd make little comments about how lucky I was to have a steady job and no kids to worry about. I bit my tongue every time because I didn't want to start an argument, but in the back of my mind, I kept thinking, why does this always fall on me? By the time dinner rolled around that night, I had a sinking feeling that something was coming. I didn't know exactly what it was, but I knew it wasn't going to be good. When we all sat down for dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. You know when everyone's acting a little too casual? Like they're all in on a secret except you. That's how it felt. Mom and Dad were chatting about random stuff, something about the neighbor's new fence, and Amanda was just scrolling on her phone. It felt forced, like they were waiting for the right moment to drop something on me. Dinner was spaghetti, which is always my dad's go-to meal for family talks. I don't know why. It's not like spaghetti makes bad news any easier to swallow. I tried to focus on my plate and not read into things too much. But then, about halfway through the meal, Mom cleared her throat. So we've been thinking, she started, glancing at Dad. I froze. Nothing good ever came from those words. With Amanda moving back home, she's going to need some help. Mom continued in an overly sweet tone. Help with what, exactly? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Dad jumped in before she could answer. With the baby, of course. Amanda's got a lot on her plate right now, and it's going to be hard for her to manage everything on her own. I glanced over at Amanda, who was still scrolling on her phone like this conversation had nothing to do with her. She didn't even look up. Okay, but what does that have to do with me? I asked, setting my fork down. My parents exchanged one of those looks, like they were trying to figure out how to phrase whatever they were about to say. Well, Mom began, you're already living here, and you're so good with kids, being a teacher and all. We thought it made sense for you to help with babysitting. Help, I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Dad nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, just keep an eye on the baby while Amanda gets back on her feet. It wouldn't be full-time or anything, just when you're home. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You want me to babysit a newborn on top of working full-time? I asked. Well, you're home by 3 most days, Mom pointed out, and Dad added, and you're not paying market rent. As if that was somehow relevant. I stared at them, trying to process what they were asking. They weren't just asking for a little help. They were expecting me to take on a whole second job for free. Wait, let me get this straight, I said, leaning back in my chair. You want me to come home from teaching all day and then take care of Amanda's baby? Mom sighed, like I was being difficult on purpose. It's not like that, Abby. We're all going to pitch in. All, I repeated. Yes, Dad said. We're all family, and family helps each other. At that point, Amanda finally looked up from her phone. Wow, Abby, she said, smirking. I didn't realize helping your sister was such a big deal for you. I felt my hands tighten into fists under the table. I didn't want to snap, but the entitlement in her voice was unbearable. It's not about that, I said. I have my own life, my own job. I can't just drop everything to babysit. You're being selfish, Mom said, her tone sharp. Amanda's going through a really hard time right now. The least you can do is help her out. Is it my responsibility to fix her? I shot back, my voice rising. Despite my efforts to stay calm, she's 32 years old. She's not a kid anymore. Amanda gave me the, "Are you kidding me?" Look, that's enough, Dad said, his tone firm. We're all in this together, whether you like it or not. You're living under our roof, and we expect you to contribute. Family, I said. I pay rent, I buy my own groceries, and I help with chores. How is that not enough? The room went silent for a moment, and I could feel the tension hanging in the air. Amanda just sat there, looking smug, like she had already won. Well, Mom finally said, if you're not willing to help, maybe we need to rethink your living arrangement. My stomach dropped. Are you threatening to kick me out? Course not, Mom said quickly. But if you're not willing to contribute more, maybe we need to discuss raising your rent. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'd been doing everything I could to be a good tenant, if you could even call it that. And now they were trying to guilt me into taking on responsibilities that weren't mine. You're seriously going to do this? I asked, my voice shaking. You're going to punish me for not wanting to be Amanda's free nanny? It's not punishment, Dad said. It's about being part of the family. I stood up from the table. It's about you two enabling Amanda like you always have, and now you're trying to drag me into it. Don't talk about your sister like that, Mom snapped. I'm done, I said, turning toward the stairs. You want to help Amanda? Fine, but leave me out of it. I stormed upstairs and slammed the door to my room, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I'd always known my parents favored Amanda, but this was on a whole new level. It felt like it was about control. They wanted to keep me under their roof so they could manipulate me into doing whatever they needed. The thing that really stuck with me was how smug Amanda looked through the whole conversation. She barely said a word, just sat there scrolling on her phone like none of it was her problem. And I guess in her mind, it wasn't. Mom and Dad were already bending over backward to accommodate her, and now they were trying to drag me into it too. I don't think I slept more than a couple of hours that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept replaying the conversation in my head, thinking of all the things I should have said, but did in single quotes. By the time my alarm went off the next morning, I was still angry, but mostly I felt stuck. I couldn't just up and leave. I mean, I'd thought about it, packing up my stuff and finding my own place, but it wasn't that simple. I was only a few months into my teaching job and still trying to save up. Rent in the area was insane, and I couldn't afford to live alone on my salary. For the next few days, things were tense around the house. Mom and Dad were clearly mad at me, but instead of talking about it, they started with the passive-aggressive comments. Must be nice to have so much free time after work, Mom said one evening as I walked through the door. Yeah, some people don't have that luxury, Dad added, not even looking up from his newspaper. I ignored them and went straight to my room. At this point, I wasn't interested in arguing. I knew anything I said would just escalate things, and I didn't have the energy for it. Meanwhile, Amanda was living her best life. She wasn't even officially moved in yet, but she was at the house almost every day, taking over the living room, with her stuff and acting like she already owned the place. She'd leave her shoes by the couch, her purse on the dining table, and random shopping bags scattered around like it was no big deal. One night, I came home to find her lounging on the couch with a bowl of ice cream, watching some reality show. She didn't even acknowledge me when I walked in. She glanced up, gave me a half-hearted hey, and went back to her show. I stood there for a second, waiting for her to say something else, an apology, maybe, or even just a thanks for not flipping out about the situation, but nothing. I went to the kitchen, opened the fridge, and noticed that half of my groceries were gone. The bread I bought, gone. The yogurt, gone. Even my leftovers from the night before were missing. Did you eat my food? I asked. Walking back into the living room, Amanda didn't even look up. Mom said I could. She mumbled between bites of ice cream. She's not the one who paid for it, I snapped. Amanda finally turned to face me, rolling her eyes. Chill out, Abby. It's just food. It's my food, I said, my voice rising. If you want groceries, go buy your own. Geez, you don't have to be such a drama queen, Amanda said, setting her bowl down on the coffee table. You're acting like I stole your car or something. I didn't even know what to say. I just stood there fuming while Amanda grabbed her phone and started texting someone, completely ignoring me again. I wanted to yell and tell her how entitled and selfish she was being, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. Amanda had spent her entire life getting away with this kind of behavior because Mom and Dad let her. And now they were trying to make me part of the problem. The next morning, Mom cornered me in the kitchen while I was making coffee. "You need to apologize to your sister," she said, her tone stern. "For what?" I asked, genuinely baffled. "For making her feel unwelcome," Mom said, crossing her arms. "She's going through so much right now, and the last thing she needs is you being difficult." "Are you serious?" I said, turning to face her. She ate all my food and acted like it was no big deal. "How is that my fault?" Mom sighed as if I was the unreasonable one. "It's just food. Abby, you can always buy more." "That's not the point," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The point is that she doesn't respect anyone's boundaries, and you're letting her get away with it." "Boundaries," Mom said, practically scoffing. "This is her home now too. Need to learn how to share." At that moment, I realized there was no reasoning with her. Mom wasn't interested in hearing my side of things. She just wanted me to fall in line and do what was best for the family. Over the next week, things got worse. Mom and Dad started dropping hints that they were going to raise my rent if I didn't step up. Amanda began moving more of her stuff into the house, filling the basement with furniture and boxes. She even started using my bathroom because apparently the one downstairs wasn't good enough. I tried to keep my distance, but it felt like no matter what I did, they were all determined to drag me into their chaos. One night, I came home to find Dad in the living room holding what looked like a budget spreadsheet. "We need to talk," he said, gesturing for me to sit down. I hesitated, but eventually sat on the edge of the couch, bracing myself for whatever was coming next. "We've been looking at the numbers," Dad said, tapping the paper with his pen. "With Amanda moving in, expenses are going up. We think it's only fair for you to contribute more." "You're already charging me rent," I said. "How much more do you want?" Dad shrugged. "We're still figuring that out, but if you're not willing to help with the baby, this seems like the best solution." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were literally trying to use my rent as leverage to force me into babysitting. "This is ridiculous," I said, standing up. "I'm already paying more than enough for what I get here. If you want me to leave, just say so." "No one's asking you to leave," Dad said quickly. "We're just asking you to do your part." "My part?" I repeated. "You mean Amanda's part?" Dad opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. I walked out of the room and straight up to my bedroom, slamming the door behind me. At that point, I knew I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep living in a house where my boundaries didn't matter and my parents saw me as nothing more than free labor. I didn't know how or when, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to get out. That thought stayed with me, growing louder every time Amanda waltzed through the house like she owned it. Or Mom and Dad tried to guilt-trip me into helping, but deciding to leave and actually pulling it off were two very different things. I didn't have much saved, yet not enough to comfortably afford my own place, and the idea of suddenly uprooting my life felt overwhelming. Still, I knew staying wasn't an option. If I let them push me into being Amanda's backup parent now, it would never stop. They would just keep piling more and more onto me until I was stuck. I didn't want to wake up one day, 5 years later, still living in that house, miserable and resentful. The next morning, I made myself a cup of coffee and sat down with my laptop. I opened a spreadsheet where I kept track of my budget: rent, groceries, gas, student loans. I wasn't great at saving, but I'd been putting aside a little every month. I added everything up and realized I could manage a move if I found somewhere affordable and cut back on extras for a while. The timing couldn't have been better. My coworker Ellie had mentioned a few weeks ago that she was looking for a roommate. I hadn't thought much about it at the time, but now it felt like a lifeline. I texted her, "Hey, is that roommate thing still an option?" She replied almost immediately, "Yep, still looking?" I asked, "Why you interested?" To which she responded, "Yeah, maybe. Can we talk after work?" Ellie's response was short and sweet. That afternoon, I stayed late at school, waiting until the halls were quiet before heading to Ellie's classroom. She was sitting at her desk, grading papers. "What's up?" she asked, looking up from her stack of essays. I hesitated for a second, unsure how much to share. Finally, I said, I'm thinking about moving out of my parents' place. They're making things complicated. Ellie nodded as if she understood without me having to explain. The offer is still open, she said. It's not a big place, but it's clean. And we'd split everything down the middle. Rent's $800 a month, utilities included. That was a little higher than I'd been hoping for, but it was doable. When would you need someone to move in? I asked. Yesterday, she joked, then added, but seriously, anytime. If you're in, the room's yours. I told her I'd let her know by the end of the week, but in my head, I'd already made up my mind. This was my way out. Then I had to figure out how to leave without creating even more drama. If my parents caught wind of my plan too soon, I knew they'd try to sabotage it. They'd guilt me, argue with me, maybe even raise my rent immediately to stop me from saving anything. So I kept quiet. Started packing little by little, focusing on the essentials, clothes, personal items, and anything I couldn't afford to replace. I stored everything in the trunk of my car, hiding it under a blanket in case anyone got curious. At the same time, I started documenting everything just in case. I took pictures of my room, my furniture, my electronics, anything that could potentially become a point of contention later. I knew from experience that Amanda had a way of forgetting what belonged to whom, and I wasn't about to lose my stuff in the chaos of leaving. One night, while everyone was asleep, I printed out a letter formally giving my 30-day notice. I'd done some research online and found out that even though I wasn't technically a tenant in the legal sense, it was still smart to have everything in writing. The last thing I wanted was for them to accuse me of bailing without warning. I didn't sleep much that night, constantly checking the clock and listening for any noises that might mean someone was awake. Finally, at 6 o'clock in the morning, I slid the envelope under the door to my parents' bedroom. The reaction was immediate. By the time I got home from work that day, Mom and Dad were waiting for me in the living room. "What's this?" Dad asked, holding up the letter like it was some kind of personal attack. "It's my notice," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You're really doing this?" Mom asked, her voice already shaky. "Yes," I said firmly. "I found a place, and I'll be moving out by the end of the month." "Can't just leave," Mom said. "What about Amanda? What about the baby?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Amanda and the baby aren't my responsibility. I've done everything I can to help around here, but I can't keep living like this." "What is wrong with you?" Dad said, his voice rising. "You weren't this stubborn before. We've given you so much, letting you live here, helping you get on your feet, and this is how you repay us." I clenched my fists, biting back the urge to yell. "I pay rent," I said through gritted teeth. "I buy my own food. I've been responsible for myself since the day I graduated. I'm not a kid anymore, and I'm not your backup plan for Amanda." Mom started crying, which didn't surprise me. She always cried when things didn't go her way. "How can you do this to us?" she sobbed. "To your sister?" I didn't say anything. I knew there was no point. They weren't going to listen, and I wasn't going to change my mind. The days that followed were some of the most awkward of my life. Mom and Dad barely spoke to me, except to throw in the occasional guilt trip. Amanda acted like nothing had changed, continuing to take over the house as if it was already hers. One night, I came home to find she'd moved even more of her things into the basement boxes piled on the couch. Clothes stuffed into every corner. It felt like she was marking her territory, determined to claim every inch of space. "I hope you don't mind," she said as I walked in. I didn't respond. I just went upstairs and closed the door to my room, ignoring the knot of anger growing in my chest. In the final days before my move, I doubled down on my preparations. I packed the last of my essentials, checked and rechecked my budget, and made plans with Ellie to pick up the keys. Everything was falling into place, but I still felt a gnawing sense of unease. The hardest part came the morning I officially moved out. I had arranged for Ellie to swing by with her car, and we were going to load up the last of my stuff before heading to her apartment. I thought I'd timed it perfectly, eerily enough. that Amanda would still be sleeping and Mom and Dad would be too distracted with their morning routines to bother me. Of course, nothing ever goes that smoothly in my family. I was halfway through hauling boxes out to my car when I heard the familiar sound of my dad's slippers shuffling down the hallway. He appeared at the top of the stairs, demanding, "What are you doing?" I didn't stop moving. "I told you I'm leaving today," I said, grabbing another box and heading for the door. "You can't just sneak out like this," he snapped, following me outside. "We're a family, Abby. Are you abandoning your own family?" I set the box down in the trunk of my car and turned to face him. "I'm not abandoning anyone," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm choosing to live my own life. There's a difference." Dad looked like he wanted to argue, but before he could say anything, Mom appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed and tears already streaming down her face. "You're really doing this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Yes," I said, standing my ground. "What about Amanda?" she sobbed. "What about the baby?" I sighed, feeling the weight of the conversation pressing down on me. "Mom, I've told you before, Amanda and the baby aren't my problem. I can't keep sacrificing my own life to fix her mistakes." That set her off. "How dare you talk about your sister like that?" she cried, her voice rising. "She's doing the best she can, is she?" I shot back because from where I'm standing, it looks like she's just waiting for everyone else to do the work for her at that moment. Amanda emerged from the basement, looking disheveled but wide awake. She took one look at the scene unfolding in the driveway and smirked. "Don't worry, Mom," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "If Abby wants to be selfish, let her. We don't need her anyway." I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to snap back. Instead, I turned to Ellie, who had just pulled up in her car. "Let's get this done," I said, ignoring the chaos behind me. Ellie gave me a sympathetic look and started helping me load the rest of my stuff into the car. My parents continued to argue in the background, throwing out every guilt trip they could think of. "Who's going to help us now?" Dad shouted. "How can you be so heartless?" Mom wailed. Amanda, meanwhile, leaned against the doorframe, watching the whole thing like it was some kind of live performance for her entertainment. By the time we were done loading everything, I felt like I'd run a marathon. I stood in the driveway, taking one last look at the house I had called home for so many years. It should have been a bittersweet moment, but all I felt was relief. With that, I started the engine and drove away, Ellie following close behind. The relief I felt when I pulled into Ellie's apartment complex was immediate. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, quiet, and most importantly, drama-free. Ellie helped me carry everything inside, and within an hour, I was unpacked and settled into my new room. We sat on the couch afterward, chatting about work. It felt normal, like a glimpse of the life I'd been missing while stuck in the middle of my family's chaos. But that peace only lasted about 2 hours. My phone started buzzing non-stop calls, texts, voicemails. It was my parents, my aunts, my cousins. Apparently, my mom had already spread the news that I'd abandoned the family, and everyone had something to say about it. "Abby, how could you do this to your sister?" One voicemail from my Aunt Carol started. "She's pregnant and vulnerable. Don't you care about family? Selfish doesn't even begin to describe you." Another text from a cousin read, "The worst part was Amanda's social media posts. She'd gone full victim mode, posting pictures of her baby bump with captions like, 'Some people would rather run away than help their own family. And at least my baby will know what real love looks like.'" I blocked her right away. Even though it made my blood boil, I refused to let her drag me back into the same old cycle. I reminded myself that this was exactly why I had left, to escape the manipulation and drama that always came with being part of my family. The next week at work, things got even weirder. My mom showed up at the school during my lunch break, crying and begging to talk to me. She was in full meltdown mode, talking about how I had destroyed the family and how Amanda was falling apart. Without me there, my principal had to step in and ask her to leave, which was mortifying. I spent the rest of the day avoiding eye contact with everyone, knowing they were probably wondering what kind of family drama I was caught up in. But that incident actually worked in my favor. I thought I was done with the house and all the chaos that came with it. But of course, life isn't that simple. About 2 weeks later, I realized I'd left some important documents behind a file with my teaching certification, tax forms, and other papers I needed for work. I'd been so focused on getting out of the house that I hadn't double-checked the small drawer, where I usually kept those things. So, with my mom showing up at my school, I told a couple of my coworkers about everything that had been going on. They didn't hesitate to step up and offer their help. "Let us know when you're ready to grab the rest of your stuff," Ellie said, handing me her spare car keys. "We'll make it quick." A few days later, Ellie and another coworker, Maria, came with me to my parents' house to collect the rest of my things. I thought I was ready for whatever nonsense they might try to pull, but I underestimated just how low they were willing to go. When we got to my room, it was unrecognizable. Amanda had moved more of her stuff in, mixing it with mine like some kind of territorial takeover. Clothes that weren't mine were shoved into my dresser, random baby items were piled on my desk, and my nightstand had been completely emptied and filled with her things. "What's going on here?" I muttered more to myself than anyone else. Amanda appeared in the doorway, holding a cup of coffee and looking entirely unbothered. "Oh hey," she said casually, as if nothing had happened. "I guess some of my stuff got mixed in. It's hard to tell what's yours and what's mine at this point." I stared at her, trying to process the audacity of her words. "You mean the stuff that was in my room where I've been living for years?" She shrugged, taking a sip of her coffee. "Well, you already left, so what does it matter?" 'Twas clear she'd done this on purpose, hoping to make things more difficult for me. But what she didn't know was that I had anticipated this exact scenario. I pulled out my phone and opened the folder where I'd saved pictures of my room from before she started moving in. "I already have photos of everything," I said, holding the screen up for her to see, "and I made a list of all my stuff down to the serial numbers on my electronics." Amanda's face twisted in frustration, but before she could respond, Mom and Dad showed up. "What's going on?" Dad demanded. "What are you doing in here?" he asked in fury. "I came to grab some stuff I forgot." "Amanda is claiming she can't tell what's hers and what's mine," I said, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "But I have documentation for everything I own." Dad's expression darkened. "If you take anything that doesn't belong to you, I'll call the police." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Go ahead," I said. "We can also talk to them about the legality of you entering my room without notice and tampering with my belongings." That shut him up. Ellie and Maria stepped in, helping me sort through the mess. Amanda tried to argue when I picked up my laptop, claiming it was hers, but all I had to do was pull up the purchase receipt and a photo of the serial number. The more she realized her plan wasn't going to work, the angrier she got. "This is so unfair," she shouted, throwing her hands in the air. "You're stealing from a pregnant woman." I turned to her, finally fed up. "The only person trying to steal anything here is you," I said firmly. "Just like you've been trying to steal my time and my freedom by expecting me to be your unpaid nanny. Not anymore." And with that, I got into Ellie's car and didn't look back. Now all that was 6 months ago. Amanda had the baby, and as I predicted, things are falling apart. My parents are now stuck providing the childcare they tried to dump on me, all while working their full-time jobs. According to the few family members I've spoken to, everyone's exhausted and overwhelmed trying to keep things afloat, especially since Amanda still hasn't even tried to find a job. She claims she's too stressed to work, which is probably true considering she spends most of her time scrolling on her phone and ignoring her responsibilities. She's still living in my parents' house now, with a crying infant and an unfinished basement renovation that's draining their retirement savings. I've heard they've made several attempts to contact me since I left. First, there were angry texts about how ungrateful I was. When that didn't work, they switched to guilt trips about how much the baby needed me. The latest strategy has been sending photos of my niece with captions like, "Don't you want to meet your only niece?" and "She needs her aunt in her life." I've blocked them all on social media and set up email filters to avoid their messages. A few family members who understand my position have kept me in the loop. But I've made it clear I'm not interested in rebuilding relationships until my parents and Amanda acknowledge their behavior and make real changes. Ironically, if they had just respected my boundaries and asked for occasional babysitting help like normal people, I probably would have agreed. I love kids and wouldn't have minded helping out sometimes. But their attempt to trap me into full-time childcare while disregarding my space and autonomy destroyed any chance of that happening. And yeah, that's my story. What I realized from all this mess is that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do for your family is to stop enabling their destructive behaviors.